But in the winter, we have had some interesting stand issues associated with um, lack of seed treatment and certain varieties of wheat showing some pretty severe diseases. And we're looking at Pythium and Rhizoctonia rearing their ugly heads. But I'm going to save a lot of the overall cereal stuff for our special discussion on cereals.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to let everyone know that I did hit the recording button. These sessions are available for a brief period of time for people to view if they weren't able to attend. I will, when the session is over, I'll send out a link that you can look at it. This is a link that's just sent to the registered, to the people who have registered for Ag Talk Tuesday. And whether we make it available, we have made the previous recordings available to the general public, but I feel like this should be a benefit of registering. So I would like to limit them to just registered people for this year. If you can't make a session in the future, look for the email that will give you the link for the recording. So I just started that late, so we missed the introduction. And Juliet, I'm sorry, I cut off a little bit of your update.
Well, that's okay. We'll review that when we go into the full update.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. Is there anyone else who'd like to give an update? Reed, I'm wondering if you might be interested in giving an update on forages or.
Yeah, I could. I've seen some of the same things that Juliet saw. It is definitely a drier year. And not only am I reporting drier surface soils and subsoils, a lot of the educators are throughout the whole Pacific Northwest are kind of reporting drier soils. So it hasn't impacted planting very much. It seems to be going good because we have gotten a few little rains that have helped, germinate the seeds and things like that. And not a lot of disease that I've seen. Of course, it's really early in the year. The alfalfa is up and growing. It's, yay high and really just with these past week when we really started to have some warm weather, it really started to grow pretty good. And I haven't seen any frost issues with the alfalfa or anything like that we usually sometimes can see at this time. Of course, we're not totally out of the woods on that, but we are past our normal frost dates. And no diseases, so to speak, so far. And everything's actually looking good. On range, I also report on range a little bit. Range conditions are moderately poorer this year than in previous years. Excuse me, I don't have COVID. I've been vaccinated for sure. But I was eating Oreo cookies there for a second. But anyhow, the range is a little bit impacted by what looks to be maybe a moderate drought this year. Definitely different conditions out there on the range. But, it's hard to, the past few years, the range and conditions have been very, very good. So maybe I'm reporting it a little bit worse than what it really is because I kind of got used to good conditions, but that's kind of what I've been seeing. And no real insect damage or other things like that. I haven't been even to one wire damage, wireworm damage at all. But of course, it's really early in the year for that kind of things, and things are just barely getting seeded right now. So we'll see how it goes.
Thanks, Reed. I see in the comments, David Callister added to the cereals update that Butte County is seeing it being wrapped up. Some vole damage to the alfalfa fields. That's interesting. It reminds me of the barn owl work that Jason Thomas and others have been doing to help manage voles on farms. I'm wondering if I don't know. Have you been involved with that, David?
I've seen his presentation a couple times, but I haven't seen anybody really adopting any of the barn owls yet in this part of the world.
Do you have any other updates you want to share with us?
No, that's just as Reed and Juliet were talking, those things popped ahead. So thought I'd put them in the chat. So
Great.
Of
Thank
course,
you for
David,
that.
you're in the vole capital of the world. So have you ever seen a year without vole damage up there?
there is that to be said. So maybe we really do need to be putting up barn houses.
So Kathy Wilson, thank you for the update on wheat. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the updates for wheat? Wheat prices are up. That's great.
Yeah. Wheat prices have just been climbing, and we keep thinking how far is this going to go? And between weather around the world and political situations around the world, it keeps going up. And of course, this last week, corn and beans really took off, and so that put a good floor under the wheat prices. So I actually have the prices that I put in the chat box are some that I get from P&W Co-op in northern Idaho, and that's they're going to an export market. But they actually had some $8 wheat, you know, and it's like, wow, haven't seen that since maybe 2010, 2011. So that's always good for our growers. They can grow wheat and do a good job of it and use the inputs they need to get the yield they need to and get, you know, compensated for that.
Yeah, that's great news.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
One of the things I do want to talk about when we are looking at the futures prices for a lot of our crops is, as Reed mentioned, we have very dry conditions on range, which means that our forage prices, our alfalfa prices are probably also going to escalate because we're going to be relying more on forage or for harvested alfalfa and other forages for feeding cattle. I think that's also going to impact some of our grain prices. And overall, as Kathy said, not only are our wheat prices going up, but everything else is as well, which good news for our growers necessarily, but long term, we do worry about shortages on crop availability for different functions. So if the feed prices of barley are going to exceed the malt prices of barley, then we're going to have some issues making malt. And the way I see it right now, the feed prices are going up.
Oh, Juliet, that just sounds tragic. If we were
Well,
out on the malt barley, wouldn't that mean there would be like less beer?
although we'll still find a way to make beer, believe me.
Okay, good. Don't scare me.
Well,
Okay.
it's the contract prices for the malt barley in the fall and early spring, early, you know, through the winter were really low. They were taking advantage of the, you know, some initial high supply and low prices. But I'm afraid that our feed prices are going to be exceeding our malt prices. And so that's going to result in some tension associated with trying to fill the malt contracts. So I just wanted to, I mean, there's a lot of interrelatedness here, all associated with dry conditions. And we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, very interesting. The complexity sometimes makes my head spin, but is there before we move on to our featured presentations, I want to continue with some of these crop updates, and I wanted to see if anyone else had an update that they wanted to share with any crop. I saw in the comments that Laurel noted that sweet corn was initiated planting for the sweet corn. Coriander and radish is up and looking good. Laurel reports, and some of the winter kill in seed was observed in seed carrots. So I was wondering if you wanted to add anything, Laurel, if there's any, am I saying your name right? First of all, and secondly, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, my name's Laurel, and
Laurel.
yeah, no, there's nothing much We started planting sweet corn last week. We're getting busier this week. We're on a normal track time-wise, I would say. Our coriander and radish is in Washington State, and the coriander is a little slow coming up, but it looks like it's going to be fine. Radish looks great. And then we had seed-to-seed carrots in Idaho here, and some of the crowns on those roots, just with the intermittent warm and freezing weather this spring, they didn't come through very well. And that's parent line by parent line. But overall, I'd say we're off to a kind of a normal start, other than, as was mentioned before, it's very dry. The submoisture's been lacking.
So with that sweet corn, is that sweet corn being grown for seed?
Yes, for hybrid seed and for our stock seed.
So Laurel, who are you associated with?
With HM Klaus in Nampa here.
All right, well, nice to have you on board.
Yep.
Thanks for that update. Would anyone else like to share an update? You can either type something in the chat or you can just hop right in. I'll just kind of be quiet for us a few seconds to give you a chance.
Kasha, this is Bill Burig. Stepping away from my Simplot food group potato roots, the crop year 20 hay market has really bumped on the Western Treasure Valley side with grass coming on so late. Apparently there's when hay runs out and the grass isn't growing, people start rummaging around a lot more aggressively. So it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of carryover hay in our area, especially with the grass still refusing to take off with the cold, dry spring that we've had.
I was wondering what was driving the delayed grass, and it's the cold weather, the cold temperatures we've had, and the dryness then?
It's cold and
So-
dry. Yeah, things just haven't really, especially the lower elevation grass, which is never that good anyway. But right now, folks that normally budget to the middle of April on their hay supply just haven't had anything to turn out onto. So I'm a little later. So it seems like the old haystacks are getting cleaned out a little more aggressively than they normally do right now.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other update to add? I'll give a brief update on potatoes then, and that is in the higher elevations, the seed potato growers haven't even really started planting, but they're pretty much they're expected to be on schedule. They're not really expecting any delays, at least from the few growers that I've talked to. They seem to be on schedule. There's been a smattering of seed potatoes being planted in the lower areas, but these aren't really big traditional seed growing areas. They're just kind of intermittent here and there. Has started. The commercial planting, of course, is well underway. Last week, I was doing some soil sampling in some fields north of Blackfoot. Every single one of these fields were planted. Prior to that, we were sampling down in American Falls and Aberdeen, and there was they were moving pretty quickly, getting everything in the ground down there. So I don't know what the status is, but I have a feeling that they're they haven't really been delayed in terms of, you know, the high winds we've been having. Like some crop planting might be delayed by that, like light weighted seed might be impacted by the high winds we've been having. That's kind of a smaller impact on planting potato, but the drying winds have definitely dried out the top layers of soil. And even in some fields, the subsoil, it seems to be, it was variable, at least from what I noticed on Friday and Saturday. There's a lot of, it's drier than I would be comfortable with. But it depended on the field too. Some fields were drier than others. So temperature wise, I don't know that we're really that far behind. I don't have a good frame of reference, but it is definitely a little drier than normal, and the winds are drying out that top layer, those top layers even more. We've been having some really windy days over here. That's all I have for potato. Is there any other crop that someone wants to talk about or give us an update on before we start our featured presentation? Okay, well, with that, I'd like to introduce our first featured presentation, which will be our very own Juliet Marshall. She's a cereals agronomist and plant pathologist with University of Idaho, and she's a co-organizer of Ag Talk Tuesdays. She's the co-editor of the Ag Talk Report, which is a newsletter that we put out periodically over the summer, highlighting the Ag Talk Report plus any other crop in-season update that we want to provide. So if you have any ideas for articles or what you'd like to, if you want to submit something, feel free to talk to one of us and we can see if we can try to fit it in. But also I wanted to mention that Juliet Marshall will be beginning a new role starting May 16th. She will begin her role as department head for the Department of Plant Sciences here at the University of Idaho. So among greatness, we're surrounded by greatness. So Juliet, are you ready to start sharing your screen and let us know what more detail about the cereals crop and what's happening?
Sure, I'll start by not sharing the screen. There's only a couple of points I want to make when I share my screen, but I'll do that in a minute. I just want to start talking a little bit about the overall conditions associated with the fall planting, for example. Those dry conditions started last, I think it was July and August. We haven't had very much moisture. We've had a very dry winter. I planted the Ryrie dryland trials very late last year, very much later than I wanted to because of very reduced or even no fall moisture in August and September. So when we planted, we had a situation late planting, very little moisture. We went ahead and planted, and I have pictures of the seed in my hand weeks after planting that had germinated, but had not actually emerged. Now, as long as it had germinated and spouted a little sprout or a little radical root, we're not worried about the actual implications associated with fertilization. We still had good conditions for fertilization once the seed is sprouted. So that never emerged. And I went up there a couple of weeks ago and took a look at the winter wheat, and it was tiny into the 2 and 3 leaf stage, but still growing. So that means lower overall expected yields because we don't have a big plant coming up in the spring. And as was mentioned earlier, I think David Callister mentioned how dry things are still. And unless we get some substantial moisture in May, which we're now just starting into, I'm very worried about the winter dryland winter wheat. So the growth stages are currently at tillering. So that is a major concern. I'm going to bring up this one thing here to do a screen share. I don't know if everybody else does the same thing I do, but I listen to Nutrients, they have a situation where Nutrient Ag sponsors forecasts by Eric Snodgrass. And one of the things that Eric Snodgrass has done is take a look at the dry soil conditions throughout the region. So this picture, can you see the picture that I have up with the soil moisture conditions?
So I saw something earlier, but now all I see is a white bar down the middle of the screen. Is anyone else having that problem?
Yeah, I saw it at first, and then it went to that.
Oh,
There
we
it is.
go.
All right, so this is the soil moisture percentage on 22nd of April. And you can see throughout the West, the degree of dryness throughout the region. It's almost throughout the entire US. Now, some areas have caught a lot more moisture recently, but we are still in very relatively dry soil and subsoil conditions. And the concern comes in not necessarily with our irrigated crops, but as our irrigated crops get into the full season where we have a huge evapotranspiration, a huge water demand, we will not have enough subsoil moisture to keep the moisture adequate to keep up with evapotranspiration. So I have a lot of concern about that. And my opinion is that not only is that going to be problematic for our irrigated, but under dryland conditions, we'll have some diseases and insect problems that will pop up as being problematic. So we will be keeping our eye on things like the Hanchin barley mealybug, for example. That's one of the things that may be problematic. Okay, so in addition to that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for right now and go back on to discussing some additional issues. Oh, well, I'm going to just continue to talk. So the timing of planting, I've heard a couple of pictures or a couple of growers and consultants say that they're really concerned about running late on our spring seeding. And I've been doing some comparisons, and people want to increase their seeding rate associated with later plantings. And I'm not really feeling like we're planting that much later. Matter of fact, we planted yesterday our Ashton location, and we're on about a normal to early planting in our upper elevation areas, which is not necessarily a reflection of good growing conditions, because that means the soil is dry enough early to plant early. So planting at upper elevations is normal to ahead of schedule. Overall, I'd say we are about on a normal planting schedule for our spring grain, but overall the weather is running cooler and the soil moisture is good to pour. So one of the other interesting things that we've had crop up is some soil-borne disease issues associated with not only wheat after wheat, but wheat after potatoes. We've had some winter wheat start to fail in their stand, and we are doing an emergency seed treatment trial associated with that situation and finding some significant stand differences between the fungicide treated and the untreated controls. And actually today I'm going up after Ag Talk Tuesday to rate those plots, and I should be able to give a report on which seed treatments are effective and which ones are not doing well. Believing that Pythium and Rhizoctonia are the problems in those two locations. So the other thing I want to talk about is some of the other disease issues that we are currently screening for. We are looking for screening our snow mold and our dwarf bunt trials soon. Well, the snow mold, I'm going to be trying to get up to our location up in Teutonia, where we have excellent snow mold conditions in the winter. And we will be taking our ratings on the extension variety trials. I think we have really good trial growth, which is not necessarily good. We want to see some really good significant impact from snow mold, but things look like they're greening up pretty well. Hopefully I'll have some good conditions, good snow mold disease impact. So I'll be rating that this week. And then the dwarf bunt, all the extension variety trials that I have for winter wheat are planted in conjunction with Dr. David Hull's dwarf bunt nursery in Logan, Utah. For anybody who doesn't know, Dave Hull's actually retired. And we have a new person on board that we get to work with, a lovely young lady named Margaret Krause. And excited to be able to work with her in the future. She's taken over the dwarf bunt nursery, but she's going to be looking at the winter wheat as more of from a molecular perspective. And so we're very excited to welcome Margaret. She has some wonderful experience from Summit, and we think she's going to fit in very well with the not only the regional researchers, but with our growers in the area. So looking forward to Dr. Margaret Krause's involvement in future research, including the current research on dwarf bump. So what I have on my screen is the stripe rust spread in North America. We've had a couple of wheat meetings, and the overall movement of stripe rust has been documented to follow several different pathways. Normally, we talk about the Puccinia pathway as starting in, say, the lower areas of the US and Mexico and moving straight up north through the grain belt region and also moving east.
Hey, Juliet,
Yeah,
is this a slide that you wanted to share with us or?
yeah.
Okay, can you share that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was being shared. Here we go. All right, now you can see that. All right,
Yes.
so that Puccinia pathway, as I mentioned, often comes from overwintering infections from the Mexico or southern Texas area, and follows the wind patterns usually north and then to the east and northeast. What we have found in Idaho in this region up here is that a lot of our stripe rust and other rust infections tend to flow from the west to the east. If you were in northern Idaho and in eastern Washington, normally we would be following the recommendations and stripe rust and rust predictions from Dr. Zhongmin Chen, who's based out of Washington State at the USDA ARS in Pullman. And so we're on a completely different pathway when we talk about southern Idaho. Quite oftentimes, when we have very high infections in northern California, we may get stripe rust being blown in from the west to the east on winds that come from northern California through Nevada and into southwest Idaho and sometimes even in eastern Idaho. Well, good news or bad news, depending upon how you want to look at it, is there are experiencing very dry conditions in northern California. And reports from Dale Clark and other people who've just come from California have indicated that there are very dry conditions in California, and there is very little to no stripe rust, even in some of the nurseries associated with consistent infection in the California region. So good news for us is we expect very little stripe rust this year. I haven't found any overwintering as of yet. Maybe Jen Vondervell can comment on the conditions. We do know that there's some rust in the Walla Walla area. Jen, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
What have you seen in Washington?
Well, it's been pretty hit or miss. There has been some seen in Walla Walla, and we have a few hot spots in our location, but it's pretty small right now, and it's been so dry. I don't see it really blowing up very quickly.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm experiencing. Well, I get the announcements from Dr. Zhongmin Chen, and so the pressure is going to be pretty low this year. Again, good news overall if you're worried about susceptible varieties and spraying fungicides, but bad news because of the dry conditions. So you got to take one with the other, unfortunately. So that means that as far as control of stripe rust in this area or yellow rust, we're not expecting the need to be aggressive with fungicides at herbicide timing. So you're not going to get very much benefit from fungicides at herbicide timing for yield improvements associated with control of stripe rust. So Good news, bad news. I'll take it. Under irrigation, we always have a risk of conditions that are favorable to infection, but of- the overall predictions are due to the very dry fall. Very little overwintering has occurred in southeast and southern Idaho, but um, the spring conditions are also looking like very little chance of infection of yellow rust. Does anybody else have any comment or seen anything else on yellow rust or stripe rust? Sorry, people use that interchangeably. So Dr. Chen has seen some instances of up to 40% severity on susceptible varieties in areas in Washington. But again, as far as impact into southern Idaho, I think that's going to be minimal. Based on our stripe rust spread in North America, our typical experience with yellow rust. So this slide here also shows a Puccinia pathway. Uh, a lot of that Puccinia pathway is based on a northern to or southern to northern flow and to the east, but we have a different pathway here through the northern tier of the country. And then from our area, from our perspective, that Puccinia pathway is going to come from Northern California into southern Idaho or be considered overwintering in our area. Okay, so I still do have some stripe rust trials. Maybe we can get some late season stripe rust, but I'm not exactly sure if we will. The other things I would like to share, potentially some wireworm damage coming in this year. We've had consistent increase in wireworm problems. We are doing some additional Taraxa studies, and Taraxa has recently been registered for use on small grains. The good news is that from what I hear, some very good and effective control of wireworms with Taraxa. So hopefully we'll get some good results. The bad news would be associated with a dry year. And when you have a dry year, the wireworms are at the surface for a minimal amount of time before they start digging deep into the soil. But the hope is that while the spring moisture is up, if you're utilizing Taraxa, it actually is insecticidal and not just a static, what we call ecstatic, which means it doesn't kill the wireworms like some of the imidacloprid products. They're static products where they just increase feed refusal. But the Taraxa is insecticidal and should be instrumental in reducing the wireworm problems in dryland conditions especially. The only other thing I want to mention is Fusarium head blight. We cannot predict at this time whether Fusarium head blight will be an issue. That only comes through as we get closer to heading for our spring wheat, spring barley, and our winter wheat and winter barley. We have two major trials, one in Kimberly and one in Aberdeen. The Kimberly one is a Fusarium head blight screening for winter wheat and winter barley, as well as our spring wheat and spring barley. Our Aberdeen is concentrated on our spring grains, and we have found some very good results associated with screening both the winter wheat and winter barley for Fusarium head blight resistance, and of course for spring. So the good news is that hopefully we'll have another good year of results for our Fusarium head blight. We do publish the results in our small grains report. And if you're interested in obtaining a small grains report, I need to find out a way how to inactivate Siri one of these days. But if you're interested in getting some of the results, they are online on our website. One final thing, we are having small grains field days this year. We will be publishing those results shortly on our website, but if you're interested in attending our small grain field days, we will be going back to full swing field days, and we don't have to social distance because most of us will have masks and be fully vaccinated. And Kathy, you wanted to add something about that?
I want to ask you, we are finalizing the summer issue of the Idaho Grain Magazine. And in the past, we have published lists of field days. I had recommended that we not do that this year because I hadn't heard anything and I didn't know if people were even ready to start setting dates, and probably better not to publish than to publish the wrong information. But since you brought it up, I throw that out there, and the stuff goes to the editor this week. So, you know,
I will send it over to you today.
Okay, perfect.
I'm pretty happy to get back out into the field.
Me too.
That is great news, and I'm really excited about that, Juliet. I wonder, Pam, do you know if you're going to have your potato field days?
Yes, thanks, Kasha. We plan on it. I just haven't coordinated with Albert at Jesse War. He's our new weed scientist over at Kimberly, because we'll be able to go do a back-to-back Kimberly Aberdeen, weed management tour, and along with some of the other projects like Kasha's and Juliet's will be able to jump in there. So we're thinking it'll be the very, very last few days of June. So that would be like Monday is the 28th. So it might be the 20th and 29th or 29th and 30th, but definitely in person, because like Juliet said, a lot of you are vaccinated, plus will be wearing masks. And I got a new karaoke type microphone speaker system last year. So we can do some dancing and singing out in the field. Plus I'll be able to do more long distance talking as everybody's walking around.
That's great. I'm excited to have in-person field days again. We're mainly outside anyway, so sunshine.
Right. And I should mention too that we'll also film or do some trial walkthroughs. And so I'll be able to post those as well for people that can't get over, because it seemed like the virtual ones we kind of did last year worked really nicely for people that never would be able to have time to come over, and they were able to participate through Zoom. So it's like with Potato Conference, I think we'll kind of do a hybrid, from here on out.
Now that we figured out how to do that, I think it'd be great to offer. I mean, that's why Ag Talk Tuesday is now virtual.
Right.
It relieves me from the burden of trying to figure out what to feed people. And it allows people to hop on when they're driving or over their lunch period or whatever. So I think it's and there's a lot we've learned in the past year that we've gotten a little bit better at. So
I hope so. So if I can jump in here, sorry I'm late. I was out planting and then I was standing out in the hallway here having a brain fog as Juliet ran back and forth in front of me. But has anybody heard anything about potato herbicides going on? I mean, they've been planted quite a few weeks ago over in western Idaho. So, of course, farmers are just getting done planting here, I think. But have you heard of any herbicides going out?
I think it'd be fair to say that the Western Treasure Valley is in the throes of lay-by right now.
Okay.
Pam.
Okay. All right.
If you could dial down the wind a little bit, I think we might even go a little smoother. So that's been the struggle over the last week or so.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Well, it's weird. It wasn't windy here today. It was supposed to be. I'm sure it'll pick up this afternoon when I go back out in the field. But we've been doing all right over here. But yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I figured that would be about the time for everybody over there. So hopefully things are going all right, and it won't rain a lot like it did last year. After people applied, like the last 2 weeks in May, I think we had at least an inch. No, we had some places that had up to 4 inches rainfall the last 2 weeks in May. That might have been the summer before, but of course that caused a lot of problems when people had already put their herbicides on and it moved the herbicide down. So they lost weed control or they had some crop injury. So we'll have to see if that happens this year. But good. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, Pam, thanks for that update. Let's see. Oh, so now, does anybody have any questions or comments for Juliet Marshall before we move on to the next featured presentation? I want to give everyone a chance to ask questions. I don't see anything new in the comments or in the chat box. That's another way you can ask questions or contribute or participate. So with that, I'd like to introduce Reed Findlay. Most of you know Reed. He is an extension educator with 2 counties, Bannock and Bingham. That's a little unusual, and it means he needs to do twice the work. And not only that, he's a horticulturist and a crops person, which means that's twice the work. So overall, I'm thinking you work 400% of the time. I'm just calculating in my head here, but Reed is going to talk to us about economic injury levels for thrips and alfalfa. This is a follow-up for what he's presented last year. And well, with that, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a bit of a follow-up. So the first part, I'll go rather quickly through the introduction, because some of you have seen that before, and then I'll get into the new data at the very end, and then what we've got planned for this year for studying these thrips and the alfalfa. And if you got any questions, just put them in the chat. And I think Kaja, you can check that for me, right?
I will.
Okay, great. You know, we've been looking at this for the past 4 years, and it's mostly a problem in Bingham County and a little bit of a problem in the Mud Lake area. And we've cooperated with about 16 different farmers in Bingham and about 12 in the Mud Lake area. This year, we went for a study that was a little bit more tighter control, and we went just to Eric Larson's field, and he was our cooperator this year for looking at how these thrips are affecting the alfalfa. So these are the thrips. This picture I took. They have little fringed wings, and they have some directional flight, but mostly they float on the wind until they find a field that they want to go to, and then they can move their flight pattern down to the ground and get on it. And they have a little piercing, rasping mouth part that you can see in the picture there that actually helps them rough up the surface and then lap up some of the moisture and stuff. I'm going to move my little picture off so I can see what I'm talking about here. Okay. So in 2020, our alfalfa study was a little bit different. In the previous years, we had just been looking at the damage to the alfalfa, just a visual damage to the alfalfa, and found out that yes, there was quite a bit of visual damage going on. And this year, we wanted to look more closely and see what that was, the damage on yield was. And so we had to put out some cages and things to get a better control over the aphids, so we could have alfalfa in the same area right next to our plots where we weren't getting any thrips damage. And so in the end, we were able to calculate an economic injury level for this pest. And it was based on yield loss per pest, market value of the crop, also the pest management costs, and the effectiveness of the pest control measures were all parameters that we needed to monitor this year in order to calculate that economic injury level. So we monitored the populations west of Blackfoot, and we used 3 replications of the study, and the treatments were enclosed plots where we had no thrips access and open plots. And I'll show you pictures of that in just a second. So the thrips populations were related to damage in alfalfa were monitored on a weekly basis starting in May 12th and going clear through the season. And then we had 3 separate harvests, and those harvests coincided exactly with when Eric harvested his fields. And then we did the alfalfa quality analysis through NIR. So there's my son. He was working for Stukenholtz this year, but he had a day off, so I had him come out and do a little bit of agronomic work for the University of Idaho. We had a good time that day where we set up our cages so that we could exclude the thrips and then have thrips populations that were normal out in the field. And those nets, I was a little bit concerned about them in the wind, but they were really great in the wind. Didn't have any problems with any thrips getting inside those cages after we got them set up. So on our thrips collecting protocol, for the multiple times throughout the whole year, we would took 6 plant stems randomly across the plot, and the top 6 inches of each stem were collected into a jar with alcohol, and then we shook it to dislodge the thrips right into the alcohol. And then we washed them through an infiltration system. I'll show you that in just a second. You might think it's pretty costly, but no, we just used coffee filters. Of course, the people in Blackfoot didn't like me one week because I bought all the coffee filters at all of the grocery stores, and I don't think anybody could have coffee for a week. But anyhow, the lid, the bottle, everything was washed, and the plants were washed through this system, and they were collected on filter paper, and then we used a binocular scope to calculate how many thrips there were each time. We counted all the thrips, and then 10% of them were identified by species, and pictures were sent back to Stuart Wright's in order to make sure we were getting the species identified correctly. But we felt like we did a pretty good job this year, because even last year we got pretty good with identifying the 2 major species, onion thrips and western flower thrips. And here's my high-tech collection apparatus there with the coffee filters there. Okay, now at the harvest time, we had 3 different harvests. We clipped the alfalfa from a 4-foot square area. The sample was weighed. Some samples were taken to determine dry weight and for the NIR analysis. And we were able to calculate yields in tons per acre. And that's the 2 different plots, the open plots and the enclosed plots. Of course, when we harvested, we had to take the net off real quick, but we harvested it, took the net off, and then put the net back on and started monitoring the thrips right after that, and found that we had very few thrips getting back in underneath on those crops for the few minutes there that we had the net off in order to take the sample. And this is some of the infield pictures that we got. We had a lot of cupping, leaf russeting, and chlorosis going on in the field. You can see those, the apex of that stem was the part that was really hit the most, the newer leaves there. It was associated with yield loss. The statistics for it was the thrip species counts and the alfalfa damage assessments were made on the same date, and we used MGLH for all our statistical calculations, and then linear regression was used to calculate these relationships for both yield damage and for yield and crop damage. And we found that thrips population in Bingham County, of course, the damage and yield reduction were statistically significant. And then the thrips damage and yield assessments were used to determine the level of acceptable thrips infestation. And we also used this linear regression in our calculation of the EIL, or the economic injury level. So first, I'd like to talk about that damage. And the first part is the results in 2019. And this chart has the bottom axis is of course time, the season going from left to right, but it has 2 y-axis. On the left, it shows the damage on a scale of 1 to 5. Actually, it's on a scale from 0 to 5. And then on the right, it shows our thrips counts from 0 to 100. And the blue line is the damage, showing that later on in the season, August and September is when that damage really went up. And then the thrips populations coincided with that in 2019. We didn't have very many onion thrips. Most of them were western flower thrips, which is the red line. And that data was, again, pretty similar to the 2020. We had a more significant drop off quicker. You can see it kind of spiked in August and September, but the spike both years happened during the same months. And then our thrips damage that year, it went up, as our thrips population went up. So they were related. And they were related with an R value of 0.616. And what we basically learned from this regression analysis here is that if you start out with a base damage of 0 in the lower left corner there, every additional aphid that you're counting, and remember, we're not counting them per it's per those 6 stems. So every additional aphid on those 6 stems that we zigzagged across the field and caught did increase the damage to the crop by 0.0135 points on a scale from 0 to 5. And so that's pretty related there. And then we did the same thing in 2020. Remember, these counts were taken throughout the whole season. And we found that the results was pretty similar. This would mean that if we started at a damage of 0, every additional thrips counted increases the damage by 0.0191 points. So once again, pretty good data there. Our R value is 0.76, so we had a little bit better R value, a little bit better fit to our model there. Okay. If there's no question on that part, we'll go into the more important data, because I know that farmers, the first year, all we could do is take some of that data to look at what the damage was. And we wanted to make sure there really was thrips damage going on, because thrips damage in alfalfa is not common. And we felt like it may be more related to just indiscriminate spraying and killing off our beneficial populations. But it seems like on a lot of our fields, we weren't spraying in insecticides, and these thrips populations were building regardless of our management, and our management practice, I don't think, are definitely the cause of this. I think there really is damage to the alfalfa in these areas. So let's talk about the yield and crude protein. First of all, here's the effect on the alfalfa yield. The first and second cut really didn't have too much of an effect on the yield. Statistically, the yields were the same. It might have been that the enclosed got a little bit better yield, but not statistically. We didn't really see a cut in the yield until the final harvest. And you can see that there was a significant cut with 0.6 tons per acre, whereas the final harvest, where the thrips weren't allowed to feed, was closer to 1.6 tons per acre. And so most of these effects have been going on. Now, this was on an established alfalfa field. I think there are effects that might be a little bit different on a new seedling alfalfa field. And that's one of the things I'm studying this year to get more data on this. And then here's the effect of crude protein on the alfalfa crop. The open had a little bit more crude protein, and that sometimes can be expected on alfalfa. Whenever you stress out the alfalfa crop, whether it's moisture stress or insect damage stress or wind damage, sometimes you'll get a little bit higher crude protein in the crop. And so the crop, even though we did get a yield loss, it did have a little bit more crude protein. And if it's valuable to people, I could run some analysis, some economic analysis. Ben Eborn said that he would help me with that to see what the real economic damage is on yield if we add back in the crude protein. But there was an effect there that was measurable. Okay, so this is the linear regression, not on damage, but on yield, on actual yield. And so basically on this one, our R value is very tight, 0.96, with a p-value of 0.000. So I think we can feel like we got pretty good data from the field here. Interpreting this, if you start out at a base yield loss of 0, every additional thrips, and once again, remember, this is on all 6 stems that we count, increase the yield loss by 0.0115 tons per acre. Okay, so you're going to get a yield loss of 0.0115 tons per acre. Okay, so don't get confused by that vernacular increases the yield loss. That's just how statisticians like to talk about regression analysis, but really what that means is you're getting that yield loss, 0.0115, which doesn't sound like very much of a yield loss, but these thrips populations can go from 0 to 90 really quick on us, especially in August and September. Okay, so I think I stated that. So getting into calculating the economic injury level, the calculation that they have that we learned in college and that is in the all of the research, the entomological research, it's the cost. Well, it's the cost divided by certain factors. And I'll talk about these right here. It's a little bit easier to see this. This EIL calculation is the same as this EIL calculation up here. It's just put in layman's term. So what it means is that you take the control costs, which are basically the chemical costs and the spray costs, and you divide that by the combined, by the crop value multiplied by the yield loss multiplied by the pest control values. And so the control costs I put in red, the crop values in green, the yield loss in blue, and the pest control there in purple, unless you're colorblind, and then I'm not helping you very much. But so on the first part of the equation, the control costs are the $17.25 for the chemical cost plus the $8 for spraying it. So you're getting a cost of $25.25 per acre as the cost. And then the crop value in here, I put $160 per ton. Of course, this year it might be upwards of 200. And so we've got to make sure that you change that for this year. So the EIL calculation changes from year to year, and you've got to put in the different data. And in order to get that crop value, we wanted to make sure that it's on a per acre basis. So if you remember back there on the third cutting, which is the spot where we got most of our yield loss, we were getting close to 1.6 tons per acre. So you got to multiply that by 0.16 tons per acre to get it in the value of the crop on a per acre basis, so that you can cross cancel there with the control costs in the numerator. And that would be $256 per acre. Then the last two terms are percentages. It's the percent yield loss, which, remember, in our regression, that was 0.0115 tons per pest. And then you have to divide that by the 1.6 tons per acre that you're getting, so that you can get a 0.72% yield loss due to thrips pressure. And that's that yield loss term there. And then the last term is your pest control. Now this can change based on how good the chemicals are that you're using. In my paperwork, I've got which chemicals we used that we calculate. We didn't use any chemicals in the study, but the economics were based on the same chemicals that Ben uses when he calculates and does his market economics for small grains. Oh, for alfalfa. And so we felt like the chemicals that we were using would control the thrips by about 70%. If you've got better chemicals, then that raises it up by, and you can put multiply it by 0.9. Now, when you put all those terms in the bottom there, we've redone the equation at the bottom. You get EIL, an economic injury level, of close to 20 thrips per those 6 stems, which means last year, if you went out and all these values were valid, if you went out and zigzagged across your field and took 6 random 6-inch stems and washed all the aphids through onto your paper and then counted all those aphids, once you get above 20 aphids on that coffee filter, that's the time to go ahead, and it would be economically feasible to go ahead and spray. Below that, it's not really going to pay you to spray. But once you get above that, it'll pay you to spray. So that was an extremely, for me, difficult and hard number to calculate and to actually do the study out in the field. And I was helped a lot by Stuart Wrights, which is Oregon State University's thrips specialist. But we also got a lot of help by Ron Patterson and the other extension agents, Stagers and John Hogue, to help me to do this data. So the calculation inputs, maybe I'm done with that. Okay, so that's basically what I've got to share this year. The next year, what I'm doing is what Stuart wanted me to do is get an even tighter control of the thrips, and then also have different levels of thrips. So believe it or not, I got a grant from Barbara Petty, our extension director, and all of this money to run these grants is from Barbara Petty. And then also I've gotten a lot of help from Bingham Cooperative, both help from their fieldmen and monetary help. to help out with this study. But I got another grant, another $5,000 grant to get a greenhouse, and we're going to I've got the alfalfa. It's up in it's about 2 inches tall right now in 5-gallon buckets. And just today I transplanted it out into the greenhouse. And so this is going to be a study that's going to be based on seedling year alfalfa. And it's also going to have a control that has no feeding, and then 3 different feeding levels of thrips, from low to medium to high levels of thrips feeding. And Stuart Wrights and I are trying to determine how much that is, but I'll go out there in the field. Eric is going to allow me to go out in his field and capture the thrips and count them. And then I will carefully move them into those buckets. And believe it or not, the netting for those buckets cost almost $400, because I had to get special thrips netting that keeps thrips out. And thrips are hard to keep out because they're extremely small. And then also the netting is made out of plastic that allows the light to come through. So we won't be reducing the lighting by more than 10 or 15%. And so that's what this next year's worth of work is going to be. So that's a lot of work on thrips, but it's I think it's a new pest that may become more of a problem in other areas. But for now, it's only really a problem in like I said, Mud Lake and a few areas like that in Blackfoot. So I didn't check was there any questions in the chat, Kasha?
I haven't been seeing any new questions in the chat, so I would like to give people a chance to ask any questions, or you can type them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and chime right in. So I have a couple of observations. So we've been in our potato trials, we've been working with this type of row cover, like what you have, that material you're using to make your cages. And in the first year we did these trials, we chose a row covering material that actually did block like 85%, I'm sorry, no, 15% of the light. And it made a huge difference on yield. So we couldn't really, in that particular trial, do any yield comparisons. But when you were talking about your yields, I was really surprised that you were getting a better yield under cover than exposed, which was the opposite that we observed, but we were using a different row cover that didn't let as much light in. Yeah. Last year, we used a row cover and we were just keeping out aphids, so we weren't worried about things like thrips. But our row cover that we used last year is very much like what you're describing. It's made out of plastic, PVP or whatever, and it blocks very little light. And I honestly don't know if we took yield data for last year. If we didn't, we probably missed out on an opportunity. But the other thing I wanted to comment on is your method of sieving out the thrips using the coffee filters. Both Melinda and I thought that was brilliant, because we've been using homemade cut up chiffon material to filter out our aphids from our aphid monitoring network. And we're going to buy out the whole city of Idaho Falls. Actually, we'll order them online, but it's a brilliant solution.
People will get mad if they can't get their coffee. I'm just warning you. So on that coffee filter, that was an idea by Stuart Wrights. You can buy some expensive filters and some expensive filtering systems. So what I did is the first about 100 different times I filtered it out a year ago, not last year, but the first year, I would take the rinsate and run it through another filter just to make sure there was nothing. And no thrips went through any filter paper. It couldn't. With the coffee filter paper, it takes a little bit of it takes more time for the alcohol to flow through. So you have to be more patient. I ended up getting a bunch of bowls, like 12 different bowls, so they would filter out. Because sometimes it would take, a good 15, 20 minutes to filter through. Whereas if you buy the expensive stuff, it'll filter through faster and still keep all the thrips. So it's kind of it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it sure solves the economics of it.
Well, I'm thinking, yeah, for our purposes, we'll have to get something that flows quickly, because we're dumping 2 gallons of water through this filter.
Oh,
so, but I'm sure they make
time.
So, but that shape is what we need, because right now, as it is, everything folds in on itself and it's very difficult. But if we can get
Yeah.
shaped filters that have
I
a
just went
larger
to
opening.
I just went to all $1 and got those little they're just for scooping out your beans out of your boiling water. So I just went to all $1 and got those.
Oh yeah, we have those, but we wanted something a little finer to put on top, like a mesh. But anyway, you got my brain thinking. Thanks
Yeah.
for that presentation. I'm looking in the chat box and I'm trying to solicit more questions.
Well, I probably
Um,
used them all, so it doesn't matter.
if I unmute them all, why did I do that?
Well, I amused them, but I probably amused them and confused them. So
Oh, actually, I have to ask all to unmute. So if you want to speak up, now's your chance. I'm trying to get to the view where I can see everybody, and that way if someone has a raised hand or something, I can call on them. But I don't see any questions. So this
I
is
do
our,
see, hold on a minute. I see Margaret Krause is online. Margaret, would you want to introduce yourself? Because I introduced you earlier. I don't know if you
there
heard
she
that.
is.
Can you hear me?
Barely.
You're pretty faint.
Sorry, I just signed on. I just saw the email like a few minutes ago, so I'm just learning about all of this. So thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. My name is Margaret Krause, and I'm going to be taking over the role of leading the small grains breeding program at Utah State that David Hole was previously in. And I look forward to, learning a lot more about the region and agriculture and different topics and questions, because certainly it's all very new to me. I grew up in Minnesota and I did my graduate studies at Cornell in New York. And right now I'm a postdoc at CIMMIT in Mexico. So that's where I'm calling in from right now. So great to be here and good to meet all of you.
So, Margaret, would you want to review, should you want to review what we talked about with the small grains? The recordings should be available online at some point in the future. Kasha, you wanted to discuss that real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
So we do record the Ag Talk Tuesday sessions, and then we make them available after the session, after the recording compiles, and we can trim off the nonsense on either end. We make the link available to people who have registered for Ag Talk Tuesday. Last year's Ag Talk Tuesday videos are, I believe they're still available to the general public on the Ag Talk Tuesday website. So you could take a look at one of these older ones just to see what they've been like in the past. But I will be asking for those to be removed since they're ancient history now. And we want Ag Talk Tuesday to be about the current season. So those videos, those recordings will be available to people who registered in case they couldn't make the meeting or wanted to review something that was said, they'd have that opportunity. So we can send that link out to you for sure, because you're here, so you're registered.
Yeah, that would be really great. I'd love to be able to review that.
Sounds
It'd be very
good.
helpful for me.
So you'll be based, when do you start your new position? And it's in Utah? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I started July 1st in Logan, Utah. So I haven't quite moved up there yet, but
You're only a couple of hours away from Idaho Falls. So hopefully you make it up here and we can meet everybody in person.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm really excited about that. I know that, David Hall often made trips up to Idaho, so.
And you saved me an email, so now I don't have to type to you what we just discussed about the recordings.
So are there any other comments or questions before we wrap up today's first 2021 session?
There is a comment from Kathy Wilson from the Idaho Wheat Commission, specifically welcoming Margaret in the chat. If you would like to read that before we sign off, Margaret.
I am not privy to that. Wait a minute. Here it is. Yes, Margaret, Idaho Wheat Commission is so glad you have joined the team at USU. We hope to collaborate with your program and USU on research that will benefit grain producers on both sides of the border. So Kathy Wilson is with the Idaho Wheat Commission. You've probably already met her. And if not,
it'd be great to connect with her more. So hopefully I can do that here pretty soon.
Excellent. Any other comments or updates? I want to thank Juliet and Reed for taking time out and sharing with us more in depth on what they've been doing. Next week, I did want to let you know that we'll have Keith Esplin talking with us about the Aquifer Recharge Program and the work he's doing there. Some of you might know Keith Esplin. He's been really big in the potato world, and now he's moved over to another chapter in his life. And we'll also hear from Brad Stokes and Jason Thomas on the Idaho Insect Identification website overview. They'll be talking about a website where they're trying to, the goal is they have a website where you can submit insects for identification as part of the overall diagnostic services that the U of I is providing. So Jason Thomas and Brad Stokes are in charge of developing and manning that particular website. And they'll tell us more about that in 2 weeks. Reed. Oh, sorry, Reed, you're muted. I mean, I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah. At first you'd said next week, so I just want to make sure everybody knew it's in 2 weeks.
Sorry. Yes, my apologies. It's
And
in
then
2
you
weeks.
said it right when I was going to say it.
So May 18th is the next session. That remember is first and third Tuesdays. If you hop on next week, no one will be here, but that's okay. I do that sort of thing all the time. So hopefully we'll see you next week, and make sure you tell your friends. Spread the good news. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.